No safety net, no ceiling. You own it, you earn it. Free market capitalism rocks. If you are tired of politics, you are in the wrong place. This is the show for the other 50% of America. My country. It just makes you happy.
The American dream is dead.
If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. You didn't build that.
I will be the greatest jobs president that God ever created.
It is true our borders are out of control.
It wasn't the best choice. I made a mistake.
And we will make America great again.
Red, blue, and magenta nation. Welcome to Judd Dunning Unplugged with your host, Judd Dunning. With CU comedy correspondent Adam Richmond and producer Fred.
Red, blue, and magenta nation. Judd Dunning here at Judd Dunning Unplugged, our show behind the show of Conservatively Unplugged. God bless you. God bless this country. God bless this amazing life that we all have. And God bless our viewers here on the Toven Up Network. Good to have you on our show where it's never wrong to be right. We're not only the donkey, but the elephant runs free. I've got producer Fred in the house. Hello, producer Fred. You anonymous powerhouse. It's been an amazing run. We've had Evan say it on his book, The Kindergarten of Eden. We've had Seth Swirsky, an Emmy winner, come on the show. Tommy Lama, Vegas headliner. And then we had the LA Times as our guest. It was just me and Adam. And if you want to see a devolution into the deepest part of the conservative wormhole, go look at that show. Welcome to our Trumptastic show. And we're all trumped up. This Trumplican is excited because tonight we have senior Breitbart editor-at-large Joel Pollok, who wrote How Trump Won, coming on to our show. We're going to get to him shortly. I mean, what a week. What's going on with Russia? Sleeping with the enemy is Melania Trump. That I'm in. She is the most beautiful thing to ever hit the White House. Right? I heard a great liberal joke the other day. You can tell Melania is conservative Republican because she thinks that sleeping in the White House is government housing. But I think that's as deep as Russia has gone. We'll see. People just want to get out of the way of this attacking, deconstructed obstructionism. I think everybody's high out there. I can't figure out all these delusions that are happening in the United States of America. It's like, is everybody now on medical marijuana? You know, I have a great idea. I think Trump should get into medical marijuana. We have Trump weed. It would be a very unique strain. You smoke it, suddenly you want to make everything great again. You're like, this is amazing weed. The Trump family doesn't drink. It was like, we've never had a drink. And you know what? Amen. That's what I want to hear. I wish I could raise Trump children. I don't know if my kids will like hearing this. Well, you know, kids, the little Trump weed's okay. As long as you work hard, get her done. And why I'm so excited to have Breitbart here today is it's one of my core news sources. I go to multiple sources. I go to NPR, the Huffington Post. I go to Newsmax. I go to the Wall Street. I go to Reuters. I go to CNN. I go to AP. But I love the Breitbart voice. They're taking on the uncomfortable PC position by just being direct. Wake up, America. These big four major myths that we have, the alt-right, this racism. When I do my show, my opening, hey, I'm Judd Dunning, God bless America. I am a Southern Christian, Caucasian, college-educated, heterosexual male, or as half of the country likes to call me now, the problem. It's immediately go to race. Russia, Bannon being this evil puppet man. What are they talking about? I like Bannon. He's a great guy. I actually read his Catholic organization statements. He said, I want to protect the Judeo-Christian origin of this country and what we're tied to in our identity. Ooh, God forbid, we're 73% Judeo-Christian nation with a constitution. God forbid we actually do that. Our guest today is just a good, normal Jewish guy. It's funny. There's a lot of Jews at Breitbart. I don't understand how it's the anti-Semitic hub of the alt-right. It's interesting, this organization has been profiled with race and anti-Semitism, and it was started in 2005 by Andrew Breitbart as a pro-America, pro-Israel news source. I grew up in the South Christian, actually. I mean, I have Jewish kids and a Buddhist wife, which makes us Californian. A lot of people ask us, why did a Christian and a Buddhist have Jewish kids? Well, it's pretty easy. I grew up Christian. I'd hate for them to be raised Buddhist. My wife grew up Buddhist, would hate for them to be raised Christian. So we just raised them Jews. That way everyone could hate them. Is that right, Fred? Right, it's great in our marriage now. Whenever you have any problems, just blame the Jews like the UN does. Parenting's been extremely easy because whenever I have some issue I don't want to deal with, I just question their right to exist. My pro-Israel sequence at the beginning of our show. If you're here on our show, we don't drink the Kool-Aid. This perpetuated racism, this alt-right, these attacks on the presidency. It's okay that there's been a rotation of power. The meltdown that we're having on these universities attacking Shapiro and Milo and Charles Murray, it's out of control. Come here, wake up, toughen up. So our guest is fantastic, and I'm going to jump in. Let's start with this. this review in his book, in Breitbart, on how Trump won by Joel Pollok. When dissenters spoke of inalienable rights and the rule of law, reporters figured it was just a few fringe loudmouths belching out insincere praise for the Constitution to cover their racist loathing of the first black president. The press ran 10,000 editorials trying to convince everyone the Obama economy wasn't as bad as it looked. They didn't believe any significant number of swing voters still doubted them. That was the playing field that our guest came into and wrote his fantastic book. Joel Pollok, Breitbart Senior Editor at Large, is here, ladies and gentlemen, on Judd Dunning Unplugged. Thanks for coming, Joel.
Good to be with you.
It's great to have you here. First of all, how long have you been in Los Angeles?
I've been in LA for just over 6 years. I grew up in Chicago and went to college at Harvard. So that was 4 years in the Boston area. Then went to Israel for 6 months, then South Africa for 6.5, almost 7 years. Came back, went to law school for 3 years back at Harvard. So I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts for another 3 years. Then came back to Chicago for 2 years and finally came to LA in early 2011 to work with Andrew Breitbart on his new company.
The educated capitalist has to work hard just to pay off his own bills, right? I mean, you get out of school, you're like, yes, let's conquer the world. I have to pay all this. I mean, it's a lot of education.
Yeah, but don't hold it against me.
Don't worry. The rest of America will. If you're educated, intelligent, charismatic, Republican.
The better your education, the less you know these days. I was, I think, employee number 6 or 7, depending on whether you count one of the editors.
From the very beginning of Breitbart.
Yeah,
okay.
So the first was Alex Marlowe, who's our editor-in-chief, and I was number 6 or 7. I came on as in-house counsel. And then about 6 months later, I became editor-in-chief when we started expanding the website and laying the foundations for the news version of the website. We had been a blog, and people had submitted articles, mostly opinion, occasionally breaking news, but Andrew really wanted to get into the news market, wanted to compete with the mainstream media outlets, not just the small ones. He wanted to compete where we are now. It's taken that long for us to get there. It seems like a very short period of time, but it took a lot of hard work. But I was employee number 6 or 7. We now have well over 100 employees. We mostly work independently. We have 2 basic sites. We have an LA office, but we also are moving right now in DC to new office premises. And many
but if
of
you're
our
an angry
reporters,
liberal, Breitbart is in Canada and Turks and Caicos, right? I mean, you have to actually have a certain level of security at this point too, right?
Yeah, we get some threats and things like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little annoying, but there's only 2 news companies that are bigger than us on the internet in the United States, and that's CNN and the New York Times, and it's us. The Drudge Report, in terms of just being a website that gets more traffic, is the biggest, I believe, or among the biggest. But we are, in terms of news organizations, I think we're 3rd after CNN and the New York Times, and we're not that far behind them. So we're at the level Andrew wanted us to be at, but I think he had bigger dreams as well, and so we're still pursuing those. And we just keep growing every day. There's a lot of interest in what we do now, especially because of Trump's election and so forth, but we are catering to an audience that is still underserved by almost every other outlet, including some of the conservative outlets that are already in that market. So there's still a lot of room for us to grow, and increasingly it's impossible to ignore us, even if you're a mainstream or left-wing consumer of media. We produce stories, we break news that no one else is going to, that no one else can, because they're not looking in the right places, they're not thinking about the right issues in the right way. I mean, you have CNN shutting down, for example, any kind of reporting on the Susan Rice scandal and the surveillance in the Obama White House. So they're just saying, we're not going to go there. Well, that's an open invitation to us, to other outlets as well.
It's the opposite. You go there, right? I mean, is that the
right.
Breitbart motto in a way, right? To go push a little farther?
Yeah, and we've covered the other side of the argument. I mean, we've presented the news as far as it exists. It's come out about investigations into Russian connections with the Trump campaign. Just give that straight news coverage. And yet, I don't think anybody has found any real evidence of collusion. In fact, you've had former Obama administration intelligence officials saying there's no evidence at all. So that tells us there's nothing there. There's not a lot of room for wasting investigative resources on a story that isn't there. But what is interesting is the connection between what the Obama administration apparently did in the last months before the Trump team took over and what they were doing in 2014 during the run-up to the Iran deal, when they were spying on Israeli officials and using that intelligence to conduct surveillance, allegedly, on congressmen and on Jewish
Were you
organizations.
covering that? You did a story at that same time. Was it out there then, or does this?
It was out
revealed
there,
later?
but actually it was Lee Smith of the Tablet, which is not necessarily a very pro-Trump publication. In fact, its editor is very anti-Trump. But Lee Smith actually put those connections together. He had written a lot about the surveillance against Israeli officials and pro-Israel members of Congress, members of the Jewish community. And he said he thought that the accusations of surveillance couldn't possibly be true because our government would never do that to us. And now that Trump's story has come out and used what appear to be the same methods that were alleged at the time, so he says he now believes the government did use surveillance of Israelis to spy on American citizens and fed some of the product of that surveillance to friendly journalists who then scared Democrats, primarily in the House and Senate, away from opposing the Iran deal. And he says it looks like there's a pattern of espionage that's gone on in the Obama administration and that they're now trying vigorously to deny, but which they've inadvertently exposed by trying to disseminate intelligence, such as it was, on Trump officials having contact with Russian officials. And so
It's not fake news, that's fake law. Right? I mean, they're
Right.
breaking the law at that point. It's not even distracting. Now we're crossing that line.
You know, there was a moment in the 2008 campaign when Barack Obama was expected by his allies on the left to vote against FISA reauthorization, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Authority. And he voted for it. It was sort of a flip-flop. And there were lots of civil liberties groups that were upset by it, and they condemned him for it. They weren't about to support John McCain for president because McCain was all for that surveillance. But they were surprised that Obama would flip-flop and support the surveillance. And it was described in the media at the time, and I remember clearly, it was described as Obama trying to show that he could be commander-in-chief. He wanted to be held to a high standard. He wanted to be taken seriously on national security issues, and so you couldn't vote against the FISA courts and FISA reauthorization and be taken seriously. But it looks like what he was doing also was giving himself a huge tool that his administration allegedly learned to abuse. They could get around the Fourth Amendment protections of American citizens by spying on conversations among foreign officials that happen to mention those American citizens and then use the product of that intelligence to identify and then intimidate those Americans if they were in the political opposition.
Wow. There's so much I want to talk about. It's such an honor to have you here, man. I was going to ask you what editor-large means because I have a feeling that's going to create a safe space issue. There's going to be a microaggression. Other people aren't going to feel large. So what is, nobody knows what at-large means. So let's tell me that real quick.
At large and not in charge. I mean, I was editor-in-chief for 2 years, and then the nerve center of the operation moved east to Washington, D.C. And I then took a different position, which gave me a lot more editorial freedom at the same time as I had less responsibility for overall content, which suited me very well, because then I could write my weekly column, which hadn't existed before then.
Which you still do, by the way.
Yeah.
You're editor-at-large and you're a journalist. I read...
Right, and I'm also still doing...
And you're an author.
All kinds of stuff.
An Orthodox Jew and a father and a friend.
All that stuff.
All those things.
So, you know, the big advantage of the switch was that it gave me the freedom to pursue a lot of these outside interests. I started writing a weekly column, and I started Breitbart California, which brought in some very talented journalists, one of whom is still in California, Daniel Nussbaum, who runs our Hollywood coverage. Mm-hmm. And then we've got two who did a fantastic job, one of whom, I should say, actually both of them really were very important in the 2016 election, but one of whom really, if you want to look at a point where the Trump campaign took control of the election, played a really pivotal role. That was Michelle Moons. And the other journalist was Adele Nazarian. Both of them now have been moved to D.C. Adele has
moved?
Yes, Adele covers...
she was on the show.
Congress.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she covers Congress, and Michelle covers Mike Pence. Both of them were covering Mike Pence during the campaign. Mm-hmm. But the really pivotal stories that Michelle did started before the campaign in 2014. There was that surge of unoccupied illegal alien minors who were coming across the border, all these kids showing up. And Breitbart, Texas, actually broke the story with photographs that were leaked from the Border Patrol showing all these children basically being held in detention facilities inside Border Patrol stations. And suddenly there were all these stories, everybody following in Breitbart's wake, of all these children basically showing up at the border. Part of it was in response to Obama's policies of allowing illegal alien children to stay in the country, and that had an effect a ripple effect. Word got out in Central America, and people came to the United States to take advantage of that. And parents were sending their kids ahead of them to find relatives or find a place to stay or find something that would have then allowed
And
families
not
to come.
from just Mexico, from
No, from
all
other
of
places.
South America.
Right.
It got
Anyway,
rampant.
so Michelle covered a lot of the early reaction to that, particularly in California. There was a protest centered around the town of Murrieta, and there was a border patrol station there that was supposed to house some of the kids, and the residents were opposed to the policy, so they were protesting. So she covered that, and then the process of doing that, she got to know the families from the Remembrance Project. And if you look at the moment when the 2016 campaign changed, it was actually July 10th, 2015, 3.5 weeks after Trump declared he was a candidate. You know, we all remember Trump coming down the escalator and Trump Tower, the whole bit, but he was languishing in 6th place. As of July 10th, 2015, he was at 6.5%, far, far behind the frontrunner, Jeb Bush. And it was then that he met with the Remembrance Project. This is a group of families that lost loved ones to crimes by illegal aliens, whether
which brought it home for all of America. We're here because of your fantastic book, How Trump Won. Like, now we're getting into your story, which is fantastic, about that core event. I think it was June. You said June 10th, 2015.
July 10th.
July 10th.
Right. So after that, if you look, so he met with this family, with the group of families in the Remembrance Project, and his polling numbers shot through the roof after that. It was the Breitbart coverage and the Associated Press coverage
Tapped a
of that
nerve.
event. Yeah, and I think it was an indication to conservatives that Trump was prepared to speak their language, to talk about their issues, to stand up for them against the party establishment, which assumed that immigration reform was going to pass automatically. And it also meant that he was standing for a lot of Americans who felt unprotected when they were given various guarantees by government of safety or health insurance or whatever it was. And so he surged to the front of the field. 9 days later, by July 19th, he was in first place. And he almost never looked back. There was one point at which I think in December or January, Ted Cruz briefly took first place in the Real Clear Politics average and then slipped back again. So Trump really took control of the race at that point, and it was through speaking to these issues that were considered off limits, like immigration and trade, that he was able to connect not just to conservatives, but also to parts of the Democratic coalition that were supposed to vote for Hillary Clinton, that turned out to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary, and that in the general election, I believe, showed up in significant numbers for Donald Trump.
My wife and I were actually just loving reading about the sustainable solar wall. Are you covering that at Breitbart? Because it's an amazing, if those of you don't know about this, they're basically putting forward proposals that hedge funds want to jump in, that we might as well build solar panel generating oil that will pay for itself. Now, you're on the inner circles. Is this legitimate? Wouldn't it be amazing, cutting from your story, and then we'll cut back into it, if we actually could see Trump achieve this wall paying for itself through hedge funds?
Well, I think the funnier thing about the solar panels is if people oppose the wall with solar panels, say, what's wrong with you? You don't care about the environment?
Right.
Do you want to destroy the planet? If you oppose this wall, you know, you're causing the earth to warm and the oceans to rise, and life on it as we know it will simply cease to exist. And
it will be the greatest generator of solar power energy in the history of the world, I believe.
Yeah, it's great. Look, I think they'll end up with something.
Something.
The bidding process ended this week, and supposedly they're going to have a winner or winners announced pretty soon. Trump likes to move quickly on these projects.
So you get into your fantastic book and you talk about this Remembrance Project and the breakthrough. And then you have a second point that you hit in your book where Trump starts steamrolling. And what was that?
Look, I think that the point at which my co-author, Larry Schweikart, predicted that Trump would win was August 2015. And August was after the first couple of debates, watching Trump in action, watching how he dismantled the worst attacks against him. You know, possibly the worst was the one launched by Megyn Kelly on that first debate night. I didn't think that he needed to argue with her personally, but she did ask a rather unfair and pointed, sharp question. You know, for some reason, the debate moderators for most of the debates treated the debates as if they were Sunday morning show interviews rather than contests in which the candidates offer competing visions based around a common theme. So they asked pointed interview-style questions of the candidates, particularly Trump, which I didn't like, but whatever.
Right.
So she asks him about his history of statements about women or fights with women. He says, no, not women, just Rosie O'Donnell. And the whole room exploded in laughter. But as Scott Adams, who's the cartoonist behind Dilbert and a trained hypnotist, pointed out, that's a very important persuasive technique that he used to basically dismiss all the allegations and focus them on one objectionable character whom everyone would agree to dislike. And so he basically dispensed with that issue right away. And nobody on the conservative side had ever seen anybody stand up to the media like that, even if it was supposedly friendly media like Fox News. So that was very attractive to conservatives. That was a key moment.
There was one moment, if I can interject, right before that set the stage. If you remember, Cruz's first, this is when I was actually, I liked Trump. I was for Cruz, and then I shifted over. There was a point where he faced the media with such fierceness, and I think Trump followed soon after and then just went on. I mean, Trump was always irreverent, but Ted hit the media very intelligently. Do you remember that?
He had a good debate when he took on the media. That's always going to be good for Republicans. The real prime example of that was Newt Gingrich in 2012, right before the South Carolina primary, going after John King of CNN for bringing up his personal life. And that just swung the whole electorate to Newt Gingrich's side, and he surged, and he won the state. Look, Cruz followed the textbook model of how a conservative should run. He launched at Liberty University. He talked about constitutional principles. He had a very clear set of things he was going to do. That was the great argument for voting for Ted Cruz, is that you knew exactly what he was going to do when he got into office. Trump's actually doing most of that. Trump's taking apart Obama's executive orders. He's canceling Obama's regulations. He's appointed a conservative to a Supreme Court seat. Basically, everything Ted Cruz would have done, Trump is doing.
It's true. Yeah, clearly.
The one issue where he hasn't done it yet is on Obamacare, repealing Obamacare, but there he has to work with Congress, and Congress has not quite been up to the job at the moment. So,
did you want it rushed? I really don't want something that complex pushed through.
I agree with you. I think that one way of having it both ways would have been to have Congress approve repeal legislation that simply said Obamacare is hereby repealed and name some date in 2018.
Right.
And
the
say,
simple path.
And then you've got a year or whatever,
to
a certain amount of time
that decision.
To get the interest groups together, to get the legislative proposals on the table, to get all that stuff worked out.
I wasn't really into Facebook Live, but I started watching it. And the Trump rallies were just taking off. And I was glued to Facebook Live. I'm like, something different is happening here. And after the Brexit went through, I'm like, this is happening. I can feel it on Facebook Live. And then Trump worked, right? He went to how many rallies did he go to? 50-something to Hillary's 20-something?
He doesn't seem to need much sleep. He did, the Sunday before Election Day, he was in 7 states and did 5 rallies.
7 states?
7 states.
Yeah. And you were with him,
Yep.
right?
Yep. What
was it like?
Oh, it was exhilarating. I mean, we found, even the journalists who hated Trump, which was most of them, preferred working on the Trump beat than covering Clinton, because Clinton was
just the energy.
It was just you saw so many more things. You were going to more places. I mean, I'm just trying to remember how we did this. We started in Sarasota, then we were in North Carolina, then we flew to Ohio, then up to Michigan, then down to Virginia, and we stopped in Pennsylvania on the way. So that was one day. And the people, by then it was getting late. We were running overtime. Trump usually started his rallies on time. So that was one of the few days he was late. There was a crowd in Virginia that was there for a 9:30 p.m. rally on a Sunday. And they stayed until 12:30 a.m. on the Monday morning on a school night. And Trump called it the Midnight Special rally. It was well after midnight. There were thousands of people packing into the building and many more standing outside. So it was one of the more incredible moments of the campaign, when we figured that this might actually happen. Larry Schweikart, my co-author, was convinced, as I said, that Trump was going to win. I didn't think so. I thought he had a chance of winning. I thought he was going to win the nomination, but have a slim chance of beating Hillary Clinton in the general. But that moment when I was in Virginia, surrounded by these people, at a late night rally on a school night with kids in the audience sitting on their parents' shoulders and that kind of thing. And I said to people, "Why are you here?" And they said, "Because we want to see history." The people were totally convinced he was going to win. And then I texted my wife and said, "I think he's going to do it." So then I woke up the next morning and thought, he doesn't have a chance. It's just the crushing
so
weight.
Exciting.
It was exciting. I mean, the weight of mainstream media predictions and polls and exit polls and all the things that went into telling us Trump wasn't going to win. To be in the media bubble and be a conservative was very difficult. And the safer thing to do, I suppose, was to presume he was going to lose and cover things. Oh, absolutely. I mean,
yeah. So, I have to say, did you guys, you're talking about being in that media bubble, did you guys get angry at each other, go, "Hey, you're fake news"? Did you ever call anyone fake news?
No, I kept my mouth shut. Did it ever get to that
level? My wife called me fake news the other day, Joel.
Oh, no.
It's crazy.
I kept my mouth shut. I really didn't try to pick fights with people. A couple people, what happens on the press plane is off the record. A couple people tried to take issue with things that Breitbart had written, but most people were actually quite cordial, and it was we got along even though we were from totally different worlds.
So that's fascinating in the press pool and your experience there. So before I read this quote, now I know there's an ethic. You're not supposed to talk about what happened in the press pool, but if there was a safe story that you could tell, what would that be? Producer Fred wanted me to ask that question, so.
I can't really say, but I will. There are certainly moments when I've been tempted to talk about certain reactions of fellow journalists to things Trump said and did, which would be very telling. And I'm going to leave that out because I don't want to.
So you're like Bannon, you're going to take down your own your clearance at the moment, just electively. It doesn't really mean anything, but just to play it safe.
No, I think some of the reactions were interesting. Well, look, I did write about it. Some things I could write about, I wrote about in the book. One of the more interesting things was we were at a New Hampshire rally the night before the election. It was a massive rally inside a stadium. And it was like being at a hockey match. It was just spectacular. And Trump's family was on the stage, and you didn't know whether they felt he was going to win or lose. It was just this tense moment of drama. And then he comes out, he reads a letter of endorsement from Tom Brady, it was from Bill Belichick, and he says Tom Brady voted for me early or whatever. And then he launches into this amazing, stirring address about how the working class of America is taking its country back tomorrow. It was probably the only time, at least since Reagan and maybe ever, that a Republican candidate had addressed the working class, had used those essentially liberal terms to appeal to voters. It must have worked because he won those blue states. But all the media were interested in on social media, on Twitter and so forth, was whether Bill Belichick had really written the letter, whether Tom Brady had really voted early, and there was no attention paid at all to what he was saying to the voters who were going to come out next day. And I thought that was telling about the media and their focus and how they were chasing the shiny or bauble, whatever the phrase is. They were just following whatever minor story they thought was interesting. They were trying to trip him up over something. Shiny object, right? They were comparing this to every other Trump minor scandal they had reported on, and they just missed what he was doing. I think they're still missing what he's doing. I think they basically report on the soap opera of the day, who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, what Trump tweeted, what he didn't tweet, who he called, who didn't talk to. And they're missing what he's doing. And that's why, in a sense, our job at Breitbart is easier. I mean, I said to one mainstream media reporter whom I was having a debate with over coverage of a particular issue, I said, "You're basically writing my paycheck for me. You do realize that." Right. When they refused to sort of see the validity of what I was pointing out to them, I said, it's fine with me. I mean, we'll just do what we do. You're not making it harder. You ought to be. We're competing with you. So, they just refuse to cover him. The frame in their mind is that he's about to disappear. And so the only story they're interested in is which Trump aide is going to disappear this week. They're trying to take them out one by one. They are smearing people. There's a lot of lies floating out there about Steve Bannon and other people in the administration. They're just stringing this stuff along. Some of it's completely outrageous. But they're trying to chip away at the White House with the hope of bringing down Trump himself. They still can't believe he's serious about being president. Meanwhile, what he's doing, while they're sort of covering their own drama, is chipping away at the regulatory state. He's passing signing one law after another, repealing Obama's regulations.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you were saying about the regulation loophole? Is that pretty known information?
There's a law called the Congressional Review Act, which was passed in '96, signed by Bill Clinton, which allows Congress to vote by a majority to repeal regulations within a 60-day window of when those regulations are reported to Congress. And once Congress repeals the regulations and the president signs off on the repeal, they can't be re-promulgated by the agency that issued them until there's new enabling legislation from Congress. What that means is basically they're dead. So the beauty of it...
This story. It's my favorite story of the night.
Yeah, well, the beauty of it is that Obama had such contempt for Congress that he didn't bother to report a lot of the regulations he was signing off on. And so Congress basically has been shooting ducks in a barrel for the last 2 months, looking up Obama regulations they didn't like and destroying them by passing majority votes to repeal them, sending them to the president. He's been signing them. And the basic tenets of Obama's regulatory state are coming unglued, which is great for the economy and it's great for the future of freedom in our country.
You say this with such clarity, and obviously, listen, you're a Harvard lawyer, you're lead counsel for Breitbart before you became senior editor at large. So you're obviously a man, and you've written many books very recently. I do not know how you've continued to write so many books and work so hard. But why is this certainty not being talked about so much in the press itself? I mean,
there's a lot about Trump that's uncertain, I think, by design. I think part of that is also good. I mean, Trump projects an image of being unpredictable, and that's very, very good in terms of foreign policy. It's also got some negotiating advantages when you're dealing with Congress. But the media miss it because they don't think he's actually governing. They think he's about to disappear. My favorite is the tweet from Sally Cohn, who writes for Salon, and she's a noted leftist, but she is a CNN contributor, I believe, where she was. And she says a lot of what many journalists actually believe, and she says, okay, here's the plan. Here's the plan. She tweets this. I'm paraphrasing her, but number 1, impeach Trump. Number 2, impeach Pence. For what? I don't know. Number 3, restage the election somehow. Number 4, have Paul Ryan, run against Hillary Clinton. Number 5, have Hillary Clinton win. Hillary Clinton for president. That's basically...
Didn't we learn from Obama you're not supposed to broadcast your plan? That was a part of the entire attack on
right. Well,
foreign policy.
It's just so funny.
Don't tell them first.
But this is actually... Some version of that is in the minds of many people. They're really thinking about the succession behind Donald Trump, who follows Donald Trump. And it's really bizarre. But that's really where their heads are. They're not really thinking he's here for good. And that's one of the reasons they're missing the story of how he's actually changing things. They're missing some of the positive stories that they ought to be reporting on that ostensibly help their priorities. I mean, we've seen a surge in consumer confidence, a surge in business confidence, small business confidence, manufacturing confidence, housing starts. The stock market's up. You can never really judge by the stock market. A lot of factors go into that. But trade deficit is down. Illegal immigration is down by 2/3. I mean, there's been some spectacular changes, and yet the media tells us this is a failed presidency. He's a lame duck already, someone said recently. And that's because they don't understand what he's doing, because they're busy covering the drama they've also written. It's like they've written a script and they live inside that fiction, but they're not dealing with what he's actually doing.
And dare we throw out the Reagan analogy that in '83 he was hated. Then there was the turn of the economy. So go back to 2004 and look at the Gore-Bush issues. I mean, people forget so quickly. There's so much I want to ask you about Breitbart, and I know our time is running, so I just want to read something. I think it's a great summary. Did you write this actual article about
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so.
About how Trump won. I believe it was somebody else in your organization.
Okay.
Readers of How Trump Won will understand that Trump wasn't just the lesser of two evils chosen by the electorate, dismayed that the wonderful Barack Obama couldn't run again. Shouldn't that poll showed Trump should have been beaten Obama, finish off that political fiction? But in reality, Trump voters affirmatively chose him because they preferred his vision to the microwave leftovers of Obamanism offered by Clinton. In the crucial districts where Trump won the Electoral College, voters embraced Trump's vision so enthusiastically that the personal baggage carried by both Trump and Clinton didn't matter. As they frame your book, and I went to the end of the book, this is going to segue us into this last part of our show. May I read a part from the end of your book? This is from How Trump Won, the Inside Story of a Revolution by Joel, who is here this evening, and his co-author, Larry Schweikart. Expectations are high and the challenges facing the new administration are great. Trump will not have much of a honeymoon. As Luke 12:48 says, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." His opponents on the Democratic side are deeply divided, but he will face resistance from Congress and the media nevertheless. Perhaps Trump's greatest challenge will be to fulfill his own promises. One of the last things George Orwell wrote was, "For a left-wing party in power, its most serious antagonist is always its own past propaganda." That applies all the more to Trump, who has not won the popular vote and faces protests virtually every day before and immediately after the inauguration. Yet, if there is anyone who can overcome such resistance and succeed, it is Trump. In the 2016 presidential election, he proved that for him and for America, anything is possible. That's such a riveting ending. I mean, you're a patriot. You've run for Congress. You're running probably, I'd say, the most prolific news organization to the right. And bravo. And I think everyone wants to thank you for your part in Breitbart. I mean, sincerely, a lot of us are suffering under the weight of delusion, which brings me to 4 questions.
It's Passover, so we have to have 4 questions.
It's Passover, so 4 questions, right. Someone hides some matzah. 4 myths right now. Russia, the alt-right, Steve Bannon, and racism and Trump itself. And I want to start with racism. There's a great joke out there that says, what is racism? When you win any argument with a liberal. This movement that is, it seems to me, in 2005, Breitbart was started by Andrew Breitbart with a passion to be pro-America and pro-Israel. The ludicrousness that this could that this organization has anything to do with anti-Semitism or racism, to me, blows me away. I read all your articles. I'm a fan. I also read the left. I read the right. So what do you think about this movement toward racism and the alt-right? Let's debunk that myth right away. What is it?
Well,
I don't even see it to be valid.
I mean, Andrew Breitbart detested racism and confronted racism where he felt it existed and was preserved and cultivated, which was in the Democratic Party and the left, because the left needs racism in order to form its political coalition, which depends on people being afraid of the other. That fear is used to corral minority voters who are told that their enemies are voting for the other side. I include, by the way, Jews in that category, among those who are told to fear the other.
Right.
And Andrew Breitbart made it a point to cultivate black conservatives, Jewish conservatives, gay conservatives.
All employees of Breitbart, by the way, right?
Whether they were employees or not.
I would say we have very multicultural history.
Sure, but he courted them as whether they were political candidates or just simply grassroots, ordinary people. Andrew held the first gay party, even though he himself obviously was straight and had 4 kids and whatever. He held a gay party at CPAC, which I attended, and it was one of the most profound, in fact, in the whole history of things I've done as a conservative, it was probably the most unifying moment among young conservatives. In that room, you can just rattle off the list of names, people who are Fox contributors today, people who are with The Blaze or Breitbart or National Review or whoever. It was just this moment of unity where all of these people came together around a common set of principles, disregarding the kind of identity politics of the left and standing together for the same things. That's what Andrew stood for. That's what we stand for. Certainly it's what Steve Bannon stood for. If you look at the website, as he was involved, kind of people we hired, the columnists, the editors, the writers, we are more diverse than, I would put us up against almost any other news organization out there. Certainly more diverse than the traveling press pool on the Trump campaign, which made a big show of judging the supposedly white audiences that Trump spoke to. The audiences were more diverse than the traveling press corps, but it's not a very high bar. I mean, we had, I think, 1 African American reporter on the Trump press plane. There's many more than that who work for Breitbart. So I think it's ridiculous. Andrew predicted that if you're a successful conservative, you'll be called a member of the KKK, and thus it has turned out to be. Which segues to your other question, which is about the alt-right. I don't really know what the alt-right is. I think the alt-right, we've got Milo, when he was with Breitbart, did some journalism about it and tried to describe it because it is sort of mystifying. But it seems to be this phenomenon that primarily exists in the internet, and it's not the extreme right-wing necessarily, although parts of it seem to be associated with that. But essentially, it's a group of people whose right-wing politics don't fit into Republican politics or into conservative politics. They are simply out there. An example would be monarchists, people who believe the United States should become a monarchy again. That's an alt-right view.
A lot of those in our social circles, my wife and
I. Right.
Let's go hang out with a monarchist this weekend. They're fun. I mean, the only person. Do you know any American?
I know one. I know one monarchist.
You know one.
I know, and that's the only person in the alt-right I could actually name as someone I actually know.
I think producer Fred, you're a monarchist, aren't you? Yeah, that's
but I mean that's it's not a racist view. In fact, the person who holds that belief is the identity of that person would surprise you, but it's not. It's not a racist view. It's just a view about a system of government.
Right.
There's nobody in America who's going to advocate monarchy, so he doesn't fit into normal political categories. He won't read Breitbart because he says we're a bunch of liberals, because we believe in democracy, and democracy is inherently a liberal philosophy. So he says, you guys are too left-wing for me. I believe in continental conservatism of Metternich, and I believe in monarchy and the divine right of kings. So that's an alt-right.
It's a great show,
right? Well, there's other alt-right views that are less palatable than that.
Well, isn't the alt-right, isn't the alternative to the right the left? That's why I don't. What are people, dyslexic? I mean, you were a Chicago Tea Party candidate. I remember when these beautiful old ladies were coming around in Continental Army outfits, dressing up in the Tea Party. Suddenly, it was the fringe. There was a war, and I got audited 3 times for being in all these organizations. I mean, we got it. I'd
rather wear a Revolutionary War costume than a pink hat. I won't repeat the name of the hat, but I think you know which hat I'm talking about. I mean, the other thing is that the women's movement, the women's march that has been aligned with the anti-Trump forces, they had as one of their key figures and organizers a woman named Rasmia Odeh, who's not just a radical, but a convicted terrorist who killed 2 Israelis in the 1960s. She's just being deported now as part of a plea bargain because she lied to immigration officials when she came here several years ago. But that's who they put on stage. That's who sponsors or leads the protests, and they're quite comfortable having a person like that. So there's no scrutiny of the quote-unquote alt-left. It's actually not even the alt-left, it's the hardcore left. I mean, these kinds of individuals, these terrorists, in fact, Rasmia Odeh, the terrorist Rasmia Odeh, unrepentant, was on stage with the woman I ran against in 2010, Jan Schakowsky, who was a representative in Congress. Democrats have no problem appearing on stage with actual terrorists who have killed people or have been involved in killing people. And yet Republicans are called out for a couple of blog posts here and there. I mean, it's the double standard is amazing. But look, the alt-right is really not a factor in what happened in 2016, other than they became very visible. But because so much of what happens on the internet is anonymous, it's very, very hard to know whether some of the internet trolls that are being scrutinized for offensive speech, whether they were actually conservatives or whether they were liberal plants. The liberal political movement beyond the Democratic Party utilizes some very sophisticated media operations. And
do you watch Homeland, by the way? This is kind of the theme.
I don't watch Homeland.
The theme in Homeland right now is sock puppets being created to push for basically for the alt-right, and they're using an Alex Jones character that's complete. He was great, by the way. He was great on Hell on Wheels. That's the only thing I like about that character. Well, you know, his last television show.
Recently, there was this series of threats, phoned-in bomb threats to Jewish community centers, and that was blamed on Trump and blamed on the alt-right, and it turned out to be, one was a African-American liberal reporter, former reporter, who was trying to get back at his ex-girlfriend, and the other was a disturbed Israeli teenager in Israel who had used various encryption technologies to mask his IP address and had tried the same thing all over the world, and finally found a ready and gullible audience in the United States at a precise moment when the Democratic Party needed some kind of a narrative to aim at the Trump transition. And it all turned out to be a hoax. I mean, there were a couple of real anti-Semitic incidents, but for the most part, most of these things were hoaxes. And you don't see any apologies. None of the journalists who quizzed Trump about it have bothered to say, we're sorry for doing that. None of the left-wing organizations that attacked Trump and his aides. And
like, shucks, we missed. It's a different, right?
Yeah, they missed. They took aim at the king and they missed. And that's basically, you know, as Emerson said. So, you know, there's a double standard, and I don't particularly care about it.
So how do we debunk? I have to say, you gave the greatest performance on The View. I talked to you about this, about not being reactive. You said no matter what you felt, you didn't react. So is there anything you can say to people about this constant existence of the alt-right as the beginning of their conversation? It's ludicrous to me.
Well, the most important thing is to say to whoever's challenging you is to say, look, you know me, you know my views. Usually it's a friend or a relative. I mean, do you think I'm a Nazi? Do you think I'm a racist? Do you think I'm an extremist? Exactly. Because if you do, maybe we shouldn't have this conversation at all, because then you shouldn't be my friend.
Start with the individual.
But if you don't think that I'm a horrible person, then maybe you should take my ideas seriously, because I can't account for all these nameless people you're referring to, but I believe what I believe. You know, with The View, it was different. I know that a lot of liberals watched that show, and the night before I had dinner with a couple of friends, and one of them was a new friend who's liberal, and she was clearly very agitated about the current political scene. And I said to her, tell me, what could I say that would make you feel better? And she said, you know, I just feel like nobody's listening to me. I thought that was a very interesting point, that there's no leadership in the Democratic Party anymore. And that's partly why this outrage and this confusion and this hysteria is going on. There's a total absence of leadership, and so people are projecting all kinds of paranoid fantasies onto the administration. And simply the act of listening to some of these people is enough to defuse a lot of the fear and hatred. And so my job on The View was not just to represent myself and Breitbart and my book, but was also to listen to some of what they were saying. And I think in listening, I was able to defuse some of the animosity. I mean, I think that especially when you go on a show like that, you do have to listen as well as present your view. I didn't give up anything. I didn't compromise on my view.
No, I also do stand-up when we're not doing the show, and my opening line is, hey, I'm Judd Dunning, God bless America. I'm a Judeo-Christian, Southern, heterosexual, white Republican male, or as half of the country likes to call me, the problem. So I just start, I start immediately with my point is like, let's get every stereotype away
They talk about
immediately.
normalizing Trump, and the left uses this term normalization. We can't allow Trump to be normalized, or Breitbart or Bannon. These are extremists who can't be allowed to be normal. You know what's weird is that they've marginalized the normal. What used to be normal, which is traditional family, going to church, right and wrong, good versus evil, that used to be normal. That's what you used to teach your kids. Male versus female, not versus, but male and female, as Genesis says. That used to be normal. You don't have to believe in it, but it used to be the norm. Now it's the margin. If you believe that, you are sent to sensitivity training or drummed out of public life. But, my alma mater, Harvard, is now busy banning single-sex organizations. And the funniest thing was the backlash came from the women's groups. The women's groups are upset. The real target were the all-male clubs. And you really strip something out of campus life when you don't let young men and young women associate with each other in comfortable environments. I'm not talking about safe spaces. I'm just talking about the way that men grow up and help each other, and women likewise. And you're not always prepared to do that around members of the opposite sex, even if you're, technically an adult.
There's a special evolution for each gender around its own gender.
Yeah, and it makes the interaction of the genders, when it happens, more interesting. So anyway, I think that they're marginalizing the normal. And what people have said about my book when they read it is one of the things they found refreshing. I didn't expect this, but one of the things they find refreshing is that when I tell the story from my perspective of how Trump won, Trump's normal. He's a normal candidate.
Yeah.
He's doing some extraordinary things, and he's got extraordinary energy, but it's a normal story. It's a story of America renewing itself. It doesn't happen all the time. This is a once-in-a-generation kind of election, but it's not totally out of the ordinary. You might have to go back to 1828 to find, Andrew Jackson, to find something similar, but the point is this is how America renews itself in our history, and it's not some kind of a new challenge. This is part of what our founders intended to happen.
And if you're just coming to our station, the Toughen Up Network, this is Judd Dunning Unplugged. Adam Richmond's on the road. I'm here with producer friend and Joel Pollok, senior editor at large at Breitbart, with his book, How Trump Won, the Inside Story of a Revolution. So we appreciate everybody coming here. I'm so excited. And as I said, I just came to your lecture. I just got the book. I started to read it today. I went through it. I'm excited to continue that journey. For me, I stood alone saying, look at the Brexit, look at Facebook Live. I don't know what it was. Some people in the room were actually with me that evening. All these people were coming to our party, and they all left, and they were all so depressed. Somebody here tonight in the room was there for that evening. So I just love it. You captured what so many people took that roller coaster, that phenomena. So we just talked about the alt-right and what's going on with the races in the United States. You work for Steve Bannon. You're a normal, good Jewish family man, intelligent, none of the stereotypes to the right, all these projections I see upon Breitbart, none of them resonate true. You've told me what you know about the inside of the White House. Tell us about Bannon. I found his article to the World Catholic Organization, and I instantly resonated and understood his ideology, trying to protect our culture without being politically correct.
Yeah, Steve's great. I had a great working relationship with him. At times it was contentious because we have different views on things. And that's normal. I think in any organization where people are very opinionated, that's going to happen. And I think that he works well with people who have different views. I think it's one of the reasons
you think Breitbart is it should be an unsafe space by definition, right?
We have arguments all the time about.
You're supposed to argue, right?
We argue, and there are different views about various different things.
Yeah, I mean publicly, there's been some. You've had rollovers there. I mean, it sounds
Sure.
like you're a really active,
the people
philosophical think tank.
Yeah, I think that the readers like that, the listeners on our radio show like that on Sirius XM 125. But I think that the real quality that Steve brings to the White House is management in a time of crisis. He's been through and seen so many things, and he's managed Breitbart through so many transitions. Andrew Breitbart recognized that technology had changed, that the invention of the smartphone had made people producers of news as well as consumers of news, and that if people saw something in their own lives that was different than what the mainstream media was telling them was happening, they could record that, they could tweet that, they could document it. He called it citizen journalism, and that is still very much our philosophy. Even though Breitbart's become a professional news organization, we still have in the back of our minds the idea that our audience is essentially engaged in the same activity that we are, which is finding information, producing information, and that means we can't fool our audience. The mainstream media often try to fool theirs, and it also means we do two things that are different than other media organizations. The first is we don't spend a lot of time obsessing about our relationship with the White House. We don't have a close relationship with the White House. We don't get the inside scoop on things. We have to scramble, just like every other organization, for stories. But we're more focused on our readers and our listeners. We're not obsessed with whether the president likes us or not. We simply focus on what our readers want to know. And the Beltway media doesn't do that. This is the second part of this. The Beltway media obsessively focus on what's of interest to them, and they report to impress each other. We don't do that. We report news that our readers and listeners want to see and hear. And that's part of what the White House has started to do as well by reaching out to reporters well outside the Beltway who actually ask policy-related questions rather than the sort of endless circle of questions about the soap opera in Washington, D.C. that day. Right. And so that idea of citizen journalism is still what animates us. And I think that that's what makes it fun for people to come to Breitbart. They don't just enjoy reading our stories, they enjoy sharing them with other people on Facebook. We're the number one political website on social media. So that means people are sharing, they're producing our stories in a sense, they're presenting them to each other. And that's part of the media environment we live in, and I don't think many media companies understand that yet. They still have contempt for their audience. They think their audience is either easily fooled or manipulable or can be alienated and written off without any consequences.
You know, it's interesting. So many of my Democrat friends everyone's still so upset about challenging the Electoral College or Russia or the alt-right. I mean, when I know that the Heritage Foundation, AEI, and Breitbart are all the think tank around the presidency, I'm sleeping well. I mean, I'm actually tired of politics. I'm in politics. I'm tired. I want to enjoy and relax because I know the right people. He's hired, as we all thought he would do. He hired so well. I just think it's fantastic to have Breitbart there. So that brings me to myth number 4, which is the other objection we hear so quickly. When I look at Russia right now, I heard you say at one of your recent talks that it was a major distraction and that the Trump organization is just showing up, looking at their list of promises and executing. Is that pretty much what needs to be done about Russia, or do you think there's been some discretion that needs to be hunted down and identified? Or the greater challenges most of us think on the right is, what are the compromises about the press leaks that happened earlier? How do we resolve this, and what's our conversation with liberals?
There is no resolution to it. I mean, the left is basically inside a fantasy of their own creation. And
Amen.
This is looking more and more like a possible disinformation campaign along the lines of the idea of blaming a YouTube video for the Benghazi attack,
Exactly.
Sort of spinning a story. And it looks like what the Obama administration may have been doing if they were watching Trump officials, as we're now hearing that they might have been, was they were looking for bits of evidence they could use to piece together this theory. And those bits of evidence were leaked to the press. And so you started seeing the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC start to report bits and pieces of this supposed narrative that tied Trump to Russia. The bits couldn't produce any actual evidence of collusion with Russia. And in fact, we heard from former Obama administration officials there was no evidence. But the media wanted just to create that impression, that sort of innuendo out there. And it took Mark Levin basically to put the pieces together using the exact same articles, the exact same sources, and say, hey, to get all these little bits and pieces about Russia, they would have had to have been conducting surveillance on Trump. Well, that's possibly illegal, especially if the identities of the people being looked at were unmasked and then leaked to the media. So it looks like that's what happened. It looks like that the Obama people finally pushed the echo chamber too far. And we're going to learn, I think, over the next several months about just how far they pushed it.
Yeah, and you made a great point. It's with the executive branch, it's going to be very difficult to prosecute that to those levels. But hopefully this resolution just clears up. We start letting this gentleman who you track this phenomenon in your amazing book, How Trump Won, The Inside Story of a Revolution, by Joel Pollok and Larry Schweikart, senior chief editor at large. Did I get it right?
More or less. There you go.
I want to add at large to my, Judd Dunning at large. Forget the unplugged. The book was fantastic. To everybody out there listening, there's a rational point of view. The system is so fantastic. Whether you're to the left or whether you're to the right, doesn't matter. If you're grateful for America, you're not going to get lost in all these conspiracy theories. You're going to focus on the fact that we're just rotating power, and there's some fantastic things going on. We've had Joel Pollok here on Judd Dunning Unplugged. This is our show behind the show, Conservatively Unplugged. We've been here with Joel and How Trump Won, which you can buy everywhere.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Right. And important to talk about your Sirius radio channel.
Breitbart has a show 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM, channel 125, The Patriot.
Great. And are you a host?
I almost never host. I am a guest.
You're a guest.
It's on 3 to 6 a.m. on the West Coast, which makes it a little bit harder to be a host. But it's a great show if you want to hear not only from Breitbart reporters, who are often interviewed on the show, but from Breitbart readers. And there's a very lively debate. It's a caller-driven show, so it's
originally
really,
was it just Sundays for a while? And then
started out
expanded, right?
Sundays, then it was Saturdays and Sundays. Now it's every day.
It's been such an honor to have you here on Judd Dunning Unplugged. Joel Pollok, 40 million unique views on Breitbart. Really one of the most prolific news sources here in the United States of America, taking news on the nose, breaking down fake news. You can go to their amazing website, breitbart.com, follow Joel, and just remember that at the end of the day, the choices that you make, the friends you take, surround yourself with a great community, faith, family, a vocation that means something to you, an avocation to celebrate, live in the dream. Come back to the show behind the show of Conservatively Unplugged. You can go to our show, conservativeunplugged.com. Adam Richman's on the road. You can see Adam at adamrichmancomedy.com. We look forward to seeing you every week here on the Toughen Up Network on Judd Dunning Unplugged. God bless you. God bless America. God bless the internet.